One of the reasons I wanted to make this video was because I don't think there are words that can describe this. It has to be seen. First of all, when these things started coming through my skin, they have a biofilm that covers them. So it kind of looks like a scab or something like that, but it's actually like a bunch of little parasitic things, and it's glue-like. And so I had to get that biofilm off, and then the actual parasite is underneath the skin, beneath that biofilm. It's there to protect them. And a lot of them are in blood cysts, so they look like they're really plump and red, but they're really skinny, like extremely thin wire, but they make this like blood cyst thing around them. It makes them look a lot larger. When you see my shirt there and the camera move, it's because I'm cleaning the tweezers. I have some more videos. I'm going to put this one on YouTube and put some more of them in there, because I don't think any of the things were moving in this particular video, and that really does help you see the parasitic. You see those are the red worms that are kind of in a blood cyst coming out. But what's significant about this is I have been sick for almost 3 years. It started in July of 23, but I didn't go to the doctor for it until like October or so, maybe November. And I was, because at first it was just like it looked like bug bites on my arms. And I did go the very first time because it was like an allergic reaction. I went to an urgent care and got some medicine. But the little bug bites things wouldn't get better. And I started thinking that I had bed bugs in my home. So we had treated our home really well with those. And that didn't help. So I went to the doctor when they got in my scalp, because it was so infected. And his PA one gave me some antibiotics, and they weren't working, so I had to go back. And those weren't working. And then I started feeling something crawling in my head. And I did a lice treatment. I did all kinds of stuff. Well, I couldn't get the crawling to stop. So I went back to the doctor, and I told him, and as soon as I uttered the P word and said that I might have a parasite, he immediately said, if you think you have a parasite, then you're obviously delusional. I lost all confidence in him at that point. So I just kind of shut down and started looking on my phone and researching what kind of parasites could be on my scalp. And I even forgot I was still in his office, and he was just in there, I had my back turned to him. He was like, can I help you? And I said, oh, today's the day that you find out that I've been your patient for 7 years, and I never told you who I am or what I have done, because I always wanted to stay in my lane. But I am a very experienced healthcare worker. I have been a critical care flight medic working based out of an ICU at the Children's Hospital. I ran the truck in the city of Columbus, Georgia. I taught doctors their ACLS and their PALS. And I had a lot, I've always had a lot to bring to the table as far as knowledge. I taught the paramedic program. And I said, on top of that, I never stopped going to college. I'm a lifelong learner with 32 years of college education. So I've been dealing a lot with data. My job at the time was writing medical grants for the research facility at UAB. So I'm very familiar with the medical data. I'm very familiar with the diagnostics and the protocols. And I said, today, I'm not staying in my lane because this is life-threatening. And we have to investigate. Well, he just said, okay, so he sent me to a dermatologist. The dermatologist did a biopsy, and she wanted me to point to where to put it. I didn't know. I couldn't see the lesions. They were in my head. And she absolutely would not just choose a place with her expertise. So I had to just point somewhere. And I said, maybe that'll get it. Because at the time I was kind of thinking it might be skin mites. I didn't know I didn't know anything about parasites other than that there's a lot of them. And if you don't get them treated, they get really bad. So she was useless. And so I sent the chair a letter. And I said, would you please send a academically strong faculty in here to shadow the resident when I come back? And the resident reached back out to me and said, I got your letter, and yes, someone will be here to shadow me. Well, I went back, and there was no one to shadow her. And they came in at the very last second and just approved whatever she had decided. So that kind of made me mad. Well, she decided I had neuropathic itch with the absence of itch. And I said, a dermatology resident has no place diagnosing neuropathic anything. And I need an expedited referral to infectious disease. And I went ahead and sent a note ahead to the chair in infectious disease. And one of their clinical managers replied back and said, we don't treat that, and you have to have a referral from a doctor. And she was real snarky. So, I was kind of done with UAB, and I was going to go home and try to figure out how to solve this thing by myself. So 3 months went by. And all of a sudden, around April 2024, an entire just tidal wave of microscopic something started crawling out of my head, invading my eyes and my nose and my mouth. And there was so many, and they were getting in my throat that I was gagging and choking, and I couldn't catch my breath. I was choking so hard on them and just gagging, just like if you were sticking your finger down your throat. They were all just piled up on my gag reflex. Well, it was 2:00 in the morning. It woke me up. And I told my husband, I said, oh my God, there's something. And so I got up and I stuck tape to my face because I was thinking I was going to see mites. And I stuck them under a microscope. And I've homeschooled all my kids, and I've been a college student for 32 years, so I have a microscope sitting around. Well, it was worms. And I was like, this could be hookworms. I'm thinking hookworms. And the only reason I thought hookworms is because one of my dogs had puppies, and they had tested positive for hookworms earlier in the year. So I told my husband he was going to have to take me to the emergency room. And it was so bad. I was still gagging and coughing. We went to Grandview Medical Center, and they wouldn't help me. Sorry about the pause on the video. I was having a lot of trouble with the app. But they wouldn't help me. They absolutely would not help me. They were like, we see this all the time. People think they have a parasite and they don't. You need to just go back to UAB. And so my husband rushed me to Princeton. We asked for, patient advocacy before we even went back. And we begged her to help advocate with us so the doctor would help me. And she was like, oh, you're in our hands now. We got you. And then when I went in, the doctor came in there as rude as she could be. Now, mind you, all of these people have manipulated and misrepresented everything in the medical records. And the open medical record system is a huge problem because it's just a narrative of doctor to doctor that they are utilizing to protect themselves from the judicial system. And that was the whole point in opening up that medical record, was so that they could cover each other. Well, the next thing I did was I had to leave because they wouldn't help me. They were rude. They were abusive. And I went home and I, coughed it all up and beat my lungs and gargled and, made a makeshift improvised little suction and started suctioning everything. And then I started having to use tape to just constantly tape my face and tape it and get them off and keep them from going in my mouth. And the next morning, my husband, I was still struggling the next day. So he said, I'm going to take you over to Emory. And that's over in Atlanta. So it was 3.5 hours. And he took me to the Emory emergency room. Well, they did not want me there. It was obvious. But they were reluctant, but they had these protocols they had to follow. So they left me in the waiting room for a long time, and then they brought me back to start their protocols. They didn't even give me a real bed. They put me in a hallway, and they kept coming over asking me questions. I said, I don't feel comfortable talking about this out in front of everybody in the building. And then... well, they did an abdominal CT, and I'm not sure if they did a chest x-ray or not. I'll have to look back at my records. I know that the abdominal CT did see the lower lobes of my lungs. And when they came back, they said, the reason your stomach is hurting is because you've got diverticulitis. Well, it was not diverticulitis. It was one little pocket of infection, which was most likely an inflamed bundle of parasites. And I had no fevers. This was, I know diverticulitis symptoms and pain because I treated it for years as a medic. And no, this was not diverticulitis. Well, then they didn't say anything else about CT. Well, they told me that I was going to have to do a stool test. And I said, I haven't been able to eat in 2 days. There's no way you're getting a stool test. So we need to get some medicine going. And they said, no, we can't do anything until we get a stool test. And they sent me out the door. And when I started reading my CT report, not only did I have diverticulitis, I also had cyst on my pancreas. And it was in the report. And I also had a small collapsed lung on the right side, I think it was. Don't quote me on that. It might have been the left. But it was obviously a whole lot more than just diverticulitis. A collapsed lung, cyst on my pancreas, and my labs were questionable. There was absolutely no excuse for them sending me out the door. I was panicking, because I had exhausted my big dogs in Alabama and Georgia. I didn't know what to do. I have a friend that's a doctor in New York, and he said, I got to go to Egypt. I'm not going to be there, but you can come up here and stay at my place. And I didn't really want to stay at his place, so he told me which hospitals to go to. So I got up there, and I was trying to make my way to Mount Sinai, but I was so sick by the time I got there. I was incredibly sick. I couldn't walk that far, and I had to get off the train and walk to these buildings, and I kept having to stop and sit down, and I couldn't breathe well, and I wound up stumbling into NYC Hospital, the New York City Hospital at Lincoln, and it was horrible. I mean, they left me sitting there for 12 hours in a hard chair. Well, first there was a line going out the building, and the line was people trying to get checked in. Well, they saw me and they saw how bad I looked. So they came to the end of the line with a wheelchair and got me and brought me in. That's how bad I was. And then when they saw my record and saw that it was parasites, they just parked me in the lobby and left me there for 12 hours. And they treated me like a dirty dish rag. And I wound up leaving in tears, and they did nothing for me. Well, when I did get through all the doctors, the internal med, the GI, the dermatology, and infectious disease in New York at 2 different hospitals, I had accomplished nothing. Not even infectious disease. I begged that man for 4 months. I've got all of those portal messages where I'm showing him new symptoms and new pictures, and they absolutely would not help me. And I was like, this is asinine. I was begging for help. Well, I had to go back home. I had been there for like 6 months, and I went home. And when I got there, I recognized that all of these things that I had been seeing developing on my body were in the house and on my child and on the dogs and on the property. And I started going around and investigating, and the whole farm was covered up with this parasite. It had just developed a lot more while I was gone. And I was panicking because there was a whole parasite covering my whole farm, and I was sick as a dog. And my child had no symptoms at the time, but we could see it on his skin. And my husband had no symptoms, but we could see it on his skin. But they were like, well, it's not inside us. And they just was, trying to be careful. Well, I called the health department. They said that they didn't have the authority to respond to parasites. I said, I need to get some soil sample kits or something. I need to test the soil. I need some testing kits to identify these parasites. Nobody in the whole country had those. I called everywhere. Then I called the environmental agency. No. I called the agricultural department. No. I called the CDC. I got a scripted explanation of why there's no channel for the general public to call the CDC with parasitic threats. No one, the health department, environmental agency, no one had authority to respond to a parasitic crisis. And I said this, and I told all of them, I said, this parasite is covering my whole farm. It's on my animals. It's on my structures. It's on my family. I'm very sick. The infectious disease doctor just told me to go to a vet if I wanted help. No one would help. Nothing. When I call and I say there's an aggressive parasite that's deadly covering my farm that doesn't respect property lines and it's coming after the community, somebody should have shown up. Well, no one, somebody hijacked all the authority to respond to parasites from all the agencies. And so I was looking for another doctor. I found a guy through the Amazon app, and I set up interviews for doctors online. I was like, get to know interviews. And I said, I want the guy who's not going to try to diagnose it, who's not going to try to tell me what it's not or what it is. I just want him to be a voice for me and advocate in the face of specialists to write my letters and to get me where I need to go. Well, this guy assured me he was the guy. And so I canceled all the other appointments that I had set after him, and I went to his office. He immediately started telling me I was delusional and that there were no parasites, just like all the other doctors. I said, I didn't ask you to tell me what it was or wasn't. I asked you when you signed on I was hiring you to be an advocate for me to get to the specialist to let them decide, because you don't know anything about parasites. And what I've learned over this right before that is that the average doctor has little to no education on parasitology. I think they're required 1 or 2 lectures, and that's it. They don't even require that. They don't teach them anything. And parasitology, or parasitic infections rather, is like the leading cause of disease globally. So why did the medical schools decide to omit that? I call the CDC back, and I'm like, look, nobody has education. And I know that you know, because it's in a published paper that I pulled from the CDC website. So you know that they don't have education. So why did you put the guy with no education as the gatekeeper between us and the resources? And then I started calling around to all these different infectious disease doctors. All of them and all the special hospitals required a specific species to be diagnosed before you could come there. I mean, they made this as absolutely hard as possible to get help for. And I said, but this guy, I said, there's hundreds of thousands of species. The tests that they're doing, like a stool test here or, a blood test there, they're checking for like maybe 1 or 2% of the potential. And you can't go by the prevalence of what the CDC is saying is prevalent here, because number one, we have too many people traveling in and out, too many products coming in and out, and there's more data out there saying the CDC's wrong. I instantly found 10 peer-reviewed articles saying the CDC has prevalence of parasites in the United States heavily underestimated. So I said, why is the guy with no education having to do the heavy lifting, and the parasitologist and the infectious disease doctor gets to do nothing but write a prescription? I said, that's very backwards. And I said, not to mention these people are being very cruel. And I said, somebody needs to step up and advocate. Nothing. Couldn't get help. I got 4 different referrals to the Tropical Disease Center. They were all rejected. I got a referral to Mayo, rejected. I got 2 referrals, I think, to Cleveland Clinic, rejected. And I was at my wit's end. When I went to the medical school to find out, what are you teaching these guys? And the parasitology faculty at the medical school in Las Vegas said, they don't learn anything. They're not that. And he said, and I quote, if you have a parasite and you are in the United States of America and you haven't traveled abroad anywhere, you need to go to another country to get your care if you want to live. And I said, I am not going to another country to get care. I'm going to get the people who are abandoning patients in this country out of the way, and we're going to treat our people here. So then I thought, surely I'm not the only one. Let me go to the internet and see who else has parasites and what are they doing to treat them. I spent about 2 weeks going online and searching through support groups. And the support groups were busting open with people. The last count I had was like 999,000 or something, and there's people growing daily. So I was all the way up to 1 million people. And I was like, where's your doctors? And nobody had doctors. And they're all trying to help each other. And everybody's trying to take animal meds, and they're all coming in the groups to show what they scored at the Tractor Supply so that they could, get everybody's input on how much of this dog medicine to take or how much of this horse medicine to take. And I said, you mean to tell me that all of you people are sitting in here taking dog medicine and horse medicine and cow medicine, and nobody has filed a lawsuit yet? And they said, well, they won't let us file malpractice. They've made sure that we can't because they're not diagnosing us with anything but delusions. And every time we try to hire a lawyer, the lawyer laughs and says that we're delusional. So I started calling lawyers. I called at least 100. I have not gotten a single person to help me. And I've got people in like Ohio, people in Seattle, people in North Carolina. There's some in Florida. They're all, I made this whole group, and I started, trying to help the people that were the sickest by, making sure that, because the problem that we have here is we're too sick to work, and we're not getting care. We're abused, we're mislabeled on purpose, and we're abandoned. And there's no one to report it to. Every time we try to report, through the channels that the hospital has set up, they just send us a letter that they investigated, and it looks like the doctor was just trying to make you feel better. I mean, it's a huge conflict of interest. And then on top of that, all these people are scared to death. A lot of them are embarrassed and don't want to tell anyone. A lot of them are afraid for their lives. I am afraid for my child because I see these parasites have completely infused all of my tissues, all of them. There's not a place on my body that does not have parasites embedded in it. And my child has this. And thank God he is not symptomatic right now. But I do not want it to get that way. And I took him to the infectious disease doctor at Children's, but I made the mistake of saying that when I was in New York in the infectious disease doctor's office, and he heard me. And I had put on my chart initially that the doctors could talk to each other all they wanted, or any of our family members' doctors, as long as we could get to the bottom of this. Well, he called the infectious disease doctor at the Children's Hospital, and when we walked in, he said, "We just got off the phone with your doctor." And then he immediately started medically gaslighting my son and blaming his allergy, his nasal problem and nosebleeds are allergies. The blood in his stool that's just normal constipation. And, the weight loss and tiredness is just, you need to eat better. And blew off every single thing that, we listed that was going on with him. And he's very fatigued. I can outrun a 16-year-old boy on my worst day, and I'm sick as a dog. He wears down fast. This is definitely affecting his blood and his immune system, his vitamin levels. And also, he said, well, fine, I'm going to send him for the test of all tests. It's the king of parasite test. If his is negative, he don't have parasites. And I said, okay. And I said, I'm not going to stay in here and be medically gaslighted anymore. So you send him to whatever test you want to send him to. I'm going to go to the car. Well, my husband was taking care of the rest of it because I was just ready to go. My husband wanted to stick around for that test. Well, they collected stools, and I think it was, and they sent it off. They had to time it out just perfectly so that he could go. It could be mailed at a certain time, so it arrived in California where it was going to be tested at a certain time before the close of business. And it came back negative. Well, then I knew his test was malarkey. So I called California and I asked for the PhD, and I said, I want to talk to the scientist. And the secretary tried to help me. I said, nope, scientist, if you're not a scientist, if you don't have your credentials behind you, I don't want to talk to you. So the scientist got on the phone, and I said, tell me about this test. And I said, how's it run? How do you do it? What's the shelf life of the samples? And he said, oh, this test is only for people with HIV or other major immunosuppressive disease. He said, somebody that doesn't have HIV would always be negative. And I said, does the doctor know that? And he said, he definitely should. So this was another criminal act. This was not not being developed. That was the infectious disease doctor at the Children's Hospital for the state of Alabama. And, I was treated so poorly so many times. When I was in New York, I went to one hospital and begged them for help. And the doctor didn't even see me before he ordered for me to be put in a psychological lockdown. And they stripped my clothes off in front of a male patient, took my wedding ring, my phone. They wouldn't let me talk to anybody. They wouldn't let me have water. They wouldn't let me have food. They had a man sitting in the doorway and told me that people like me didn't get phone calls and treated me like a criminal. It was so degrading. And I was, I was just like, you guys are going to really regret this. And I kept telling them that you need to go call my husband. You need to go call my husband. You need to go call my husband. And they were like, why are you in New York? Why'd you come to? And they drilled me about why I was in New York. They did that in Texas too. Why are you in Texas? They're more concerned about why I'm at their hospital, in their area, as opposed to what's going on with my body and how can they help me. And they had 3 different psychiatrists come in there. And I guess the first one didn't call me delusional, then the second one didn't. But when the third one came in, they were ridiculing me, the psychologists or psychiatrists were. They were like, why do you think they don't believe you? And I said, because they're not looking at any of the images or the videos. They literally refuse to look. That's another thing that makes me understand that it's on purpose. Because if they were really in the business to save lives and to stop this, they would look at the pictures. They would want to know. When I want to save a life, I'm jumping over the table to see what's bothering my patient. None of them wanted to see the images. None of them wanted. I said, I tried to show them a video of it, and they refused to look. And he said, well, how long's the video? I said, I think maybe 10 minutes. And he said, what? And he busted out laughing. You think somebody's going to watch a 10-minute video? And I said, yes, I do. I think that watching, just a few minutes of a 10-minute video would have been plenty for them to realize that they had a life to save. And if 10 minutes of your time's not, is not available to save lives, then you're really in the wrong business. And they lectured me before they kicked me out the next morning. Once they realized that I wasn't delusional, they put me out on the street instead of treating me what I was there for. So thinking I had parasites, I would have been kept. But not having them, would have got me kept. But having parasites, nah, we're done. You can leave. So I started digging and digging and digging. I started asking everybody to make lists of the doctors that they've been to. I made this group. We were like, we've got to get to the bottom of this. And I just started reading as much as I could about the laws. And I knew that we couldn't do a malpractice suit because they've really set the stage to prevent that. And no one can afford to work. No, people are losing their homes. I rescued one guy from a storage locker in the winter and brought him to my house to live. Had made my husband go get him from the bus station. I had him bus down here from Ohio. I sent food and Christmas to another girl that can't work and the church is paying her rent. I sent dog medicine to Seattle. And, there's another guy, Stephen Doloff. I don't think he's going to live through the end of the month. I don't think that the girl in Seattle is going to live that long. She's going to wind up killing herself because this is driving her crazy. And the girl in Ohio, she calls me every day, bawling and crying, terrified for her life. And I get it. I am terrified for my life as well. But I have not been able to find a single person who calls themselves a leader in the United States of America that's willing to stand up for 1 million people that are being literally abused and tortured and abandoned. And I filed the federal case in the federal district court of Middle Alabama, pro se, after calling all those attorneys. I haven't been able to work in 2 years now, and I'm trying to pull the paperwork together, but it's hard because I'm very sick. I had emergency motions in there to rescue people and to investigate and find out who is behind this, because we shouldn't be tortured and dying in the United States of America, and we certainly shouldn't be doing it without representation. So the first emergency motion was thrown out from the district court stating that it would take years to go through all them records. Well, we shouldn't have to go through all those records. We should have to go through one. If they kill one person, they're culpable. They need to be held responsible. We can track what's going on and turn it around. I will lay out an outline of how to fix this. I'm dumping all 32 years of my education onto this problem if I can live that long. I don't even look like myself anymore. I'm being mistaken for an end-stage cancer patient everywhere I go. I've lost all my hair. I've lost everything. I've lost my farm. I can't even go there because it's so infested. And I can't sell it because if I sell it, someone else will get sick. So I'm having to pay the mortgage at the farm plus pay a rental place. My husband's having to double down and work as much as he can. He's meeting himself coming and going to try and keep up with the bills, plus my travels to try and find help. And it just doesn't exist. So I found this one doctor that was willing to help, but he does everything under the radar. And he told me repeatedly that he stays under the low key, stays under the radar. He doesn't want anybody to know what he's doing. He doesn't even use a pharmacy. He has a chemist compound all the medicines for him. And he said, if they find out that I'm doing this, they're going to shut me down. They're not going to let me save people with parasites. So he can't even come testify because he's terrified that he won't ever get to help anybody. I had a parasitologist that initially was all gung-ho. It was wanting to diagnose it. When I got there, he looked at it. He immediately said, that's parasitic. That's parasitic. And he called me back and he said, I think that it may be a GMO parasite. It's not like anything I've ever seen before. It's just got characteristics of a couple things. He said, it looks like it's made in a lab. And he said, maybe it came in the chemtrails. I don't know. Maybe it came, in products from somewhere. Maybe it's bioweapon. I don't know. And I said, well, we need to expedite this and let's go. And now he's AWOL. I can't find him. And I don't know if somebody got to him or what. But every time I turn around, there's trolls in these groups that are constantly, in these support groups that are constantly trying to get me kicked out. They've gotten me kicked out of the groups multiple times. Because on the Facebook, the way it works is if 3 people report your post, you're automatically banned from the group without the administrators even having a say. If their settings are that way. So there's a lot of trolls in there, and that's what they, how they get people that are raising ruckus out. And so I'm having to send secret messages into the groups with other people. But there's a lot of us with this disease. There's no help for us here. There's one guy that I mentioned under the radar, but he can't treat 1 million people. I called all of my elected officials. I called the senators and the representatives and the governor. I got crickets. No one. No lawyer. No doctor. No politician. No agency. I'm standing here alone trying to save 1 million people plus the ones I have not encountered yet. And I need to know that there's somebody that is going to recognize that this is serious before it kills my child. I'm sure that my life is over. I'm sure I'm too infiltrated with this to survive. But my child has a very good chance of having a strong, healthy future. And I need you to stand up for him because no one else is doing that. And I have no strength. I'm going to give it my all to pull this off, but I can't do it without at least one person standing up and saying, we've got to address this. I've been trying to get in front of RFK, can't get in front of him. I can't get past the gatekeepers for anybody. And I'm so sick. I don't think I'm going to live long enough to keep trying. So, this is very important. Anyway, the first motion was thrown out. I didn't know how to write court papers. I did my best. I can write. I'm a creative writer, and I can write content to teach people. But I can't. I haven't been able to sit down and read all the rules to the court and comprehend them because I'm too sick. I don't have time. I'm just trying to throw it on paper and hand it to you so that you can help. And I just don't understand what happened to humans, because there should be a human amongst the politicians, and there should be a human amongst the attorneys and the doctors. I get it that a lot of the doctors are oblivious and don't know. I get that, because they're not taught, and they're looking at the records and they're saying, oh, look, delusions, we don't have to treat this. But I haven't found a single one person who was treated properly. I'm not saying that there's no one that was treated for parasites, but I can't find them. But I found 1 million who weren't. And we're being told by the faculty at the medical school to go to another country. There's a big problem with that. But it is a little bit deeper than this. I started trying to figure out why this exists. And, there was a lot of speculation at first with, well, it is definitely more lucrative to, treat the secondary infections. But then when the parasitologist made the comment that he thought that this might be a bioweapon, I decided to track the CDC's response to parasitic things back a bit to see if I could figure out where it started. And when Obama was president, I think it was the first time. I don't know, maybe. He was doing a nanotech project. And also, there was some changes to the law that opened up the CDC to get funding to do like a bioweapon, bioterrorism, and a microorganism type investigations, and so it was all tied up in CDC. Meanwhile, all the critics and scholars across the globe were telling the CDC that they were heavily underestimating the prevalence. And then I found some documents on the CDC site in their archives that were talking about things that cause risk, they increase the risk for parasitic infections. And one of those was steroidal medications. Steroidal medications lowers the immune system. So when you take a steroid and your immune system goes down, you are much more susceptible to getting parasites. And so I said, okay, so steroids makes you much more susceptible. Then I said, well, what happens if you already have parasites and you take the steroid? Because according to the data from other countries, like 70% of the globe has strongyloids. And the CDC was saying there weren't that many here, but I don't know what to believe as far as the prevalence of strongyloids. That's a particular species of parasite. And it's not even just strongyloids. It's like there are other parasites are the same way in response to steroidal medications. So when you give someone who already has a parasite the steroid, they have a hyperinfection set in. And that means they just thrive and multiply and multiply and multiply. I mean, a tapeworm can lay 1 million eggs a day. So, I mean, it's like exponentially increases the load of parasites on the person to the point they can't tolerate it. And they die. The number one cause of death in parasitic infections is the failure to diagnose. And I get it. It's the number one cause of death. It's the failure to diagnose. You don't diagnose it, you don't get treated. But I couldn't figure out why the CDC would not mention this broad and loudly about the steroids when they gave all those steroids out for COVID patients, because that was their recommendation, was steroid. The CD, perked up and started being a public-facing entity at that point, and that was it had been a long time since that had happened. And they were pushing these steroids, and there is a high probability that the COVID deaths are heavily skewed globally because the steroidal medications in the face of a parasitic infection equals death. And the data said there was 70% of the globe had a strongyloid because they have no symptoms for years. So most people have no idea that they even have them. And, the data was right there on the CDC site. So then I said, well, let me look at the prevalence of reported strongyloid or other parasites after the steroids were introduced. The WHO shut down all research on parasites mid-2020. And then the CDC followed suit, and they shut down all research on parasites in, I think it was 2021. Maybe it was 2021. It was 2021 that they did that. And not only did they shut down the research on parasites, but they also reeled in the diagnostics. And there's a paper that Dr. Norman Beatty published that pretty much echoes everything that I found in the data. I just came across his paper and I was like, I thought I wrote it. I was like, this is great. When did I write this? And then I saw his name and I was like, he read my mind. So I have reached out to Dr. Beatty. He has not replied back to me. I'm trying to get him to come and speak to the court on behalf of these people, because he wrote the paper stating that the CDC did a disjustice to humanity by reeling in the diagnostics and by shutting down the research. and that there was a lot of people that are suffering, that there's a lot of specific parasites that no one else has the testing for. The CDC was the only place to get it. The place that had no authority to respond to parasites. They were the only, according to Beatty, they're the only place to get those diagnostics. So they are definitely behind the, whatever's going on with the failure to diagnose. I just think that I believe that the CDC was trying to cover up their error in dishing out all those steroids without verifying their parasitic data. And that's why they shut it down. That's my theory. So I understand that you can't do anything about speculation. But what I do think is important is that, we raise these questions and we investigate this and we find out who made these decisions, and they have to go to jail. The person who made the decisions has to go to jail. This is killing my family and a million other people that I have identified in 2 weeks. So I'm sorry, but there's a lot more than a million. And the doctors that intentionally rejected us, when I told someone I'm choking on worms, I was literally coughing up worms so big that you could bait a hook with them. And I went to the emergency room and I was told, we don't treat parasites here. And I said, do you treat foreign body objects in the lungs? And they said, not if they're parasites, duh, and walked off. I think I already told you that. But that was Texas, in Galveston. That guy, he needs to go to jail. There was another guy at Baylor in the ER. I was on my knees, crying, begging, pleading for my family's lives. And all I wanted him to do was to contact the infectious disease doctors at the Tropical Disease Center. And he stepped over me and refused and wouldn't even look down and talk to me about it, or just treated me like garbage. The people who stripped me naked and shoved me into a room before the doctor ever encountered, simply because I said I have a parasite, they go to jail. They go to jail. There's no place in this country where we can file reports for criminal acts in the medical industry. I tried. I called the FBI and they hung up on me. I called the sheriff's department and they laughed it off. There is no recourse for millions of people, and this is a Holocaust in 2025. We need help. We need help today. I'm going to stop the video. There's still a lot more, but I think that that's enough.